wow, now for the first time, we have an article that proves that the IPCC consensus about the human origins of climate change is debunked. It seems like the article is perfectly legitimate. But when you scratch on the surface, you soon realize that actually there are plenty of huge problems. One of the co-authors of the article is Grok 3. It's what we call an academic deepfake.
Welcome to ESCP Edge, the video podcast series that brings you insights from ESCP professors at the cutting edge of business research. My name's Nick Taylor, and today I'm joined by Aurélien Acquier, Professor of Management and Sustainability and Director of the ESCP Sustainability Institute, and Jozef Cossey, a postdoctoral researcher from ESCP. Thanks a lot for coming in.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Nick.
Aurélien, do you want to start by telling us a little bit about your field of research and how you came to study that?
Yeah, sure. Basically, I would say when I'm asked about presenting my research, that I'm passionate about trying to understand the differences and the interactions between social systems, management, and natural systems. And when you think about that from a disciplinary perspective, management science, it has been built as an interdisciplinary field, but interdisciplinary with mostly economics and sociology. And presently, with the issue of climate change and planetary boundaries, the big topic is to rethink a little bit that interdisciplinary and to bring in knowledge that is from biology, from system dynamics into management. And I would say that that's really what drives me and my research.
And Jozef, the same thing? Do you overlap with Aurélien's field of research?
Of course, yeah. So I myself also really focus on these questions of business and the natural environment. And so it's this common interest that we really explore together in the ESCP Sustainability Institute.
Okay, so just tell me a little bit more about the Institute.
So actually the ESCP Institutes were created 2 years ago. And basically the idea of the Sustainability Institute is really to create this type of object to try to drive impactful research between our academics within the school and all the stakeholders around the school. And so basically what we're really trying to do is to push for relevant research that is also generating engagement with practitioners. So we try to push collaborative research that engages both academics and practitioners. And we do different initiatives, but one that is, I think, very important in what we've done is work on climate adaptation strategies, how companies adapt to climate change. It's really interesting because it's both an understudied topics in management presently, and at the same time, it's super relevant for managers. And so we try to work on this by developing collaborations over the last year with different large companies.
Fantastic. I heard you speaking about a piece of research that you were doing, and during this research or during the program, you came across a piece of climate skeptic, a paper that had been published, and one of the authors of the paper was listed as Grok 3, the artificial intelligence generative AI tool. Is that a new thing? That's not something that I'd ever come across. What are the implications of this?
But so here, indeed, actually, we came across this article co-written with Grok 3 when I was preparing a masterclass on sustainability and polarization and the connection between this and AI. And actually, when I was preparing this masterclass about how the social context is changing around sustainability topics, I came across this article that was recently published in a journal that I didn't know at all. And the name of the journal is Science of Climate Change, which may seem super legitimate when you first hear about, but it's not being listed as a legitimate academic output for people that work on climate science. And you will understand why in a minute. Actually, here, the article was reporting on social media, on X and other social media, and saying, wow, now for the first time, we have an article that proves that the IPCC consensus about the human origins of climate change is debunked. And this is because, and we are sure about that because it's done by a rational tool. One of the co-authors of the article is Grok 3. And so I was really, of course, curious and interested about that. And so I tried to explore the article. And what's really fascinating is that actually when you're outside the field, it seems like the article is perfectly legitimate. It's being published in an article with a legitimate name, Science of Climate Change. It's being published by authors. It has the form of a classic academic output. But when you scratch on the surface, you soon realize that actually there are plenty of huge problems. Like the paper was accepted in no time, like just a few weeks after it was sent, which raises the question of was it really peer-reviewed or not? And then when you just read about this journal, you realize that the journal project is to promote climate skeptic articles somehow. And so we were like, what type of object is that? It's really strange, you know? So we said it's type of new object that we're confronted with. It's not entirely new, we may discuss that, but it's what we call an academic deepfake. So one article that seems to be written as a classic article, but that is meant to deceive the audience. And so we just took that example and tried to analyze what does it say about the role of AI in producing deepfakes. And what we say actually is that there are basically two types of academic deepfakes. There is this disinformation-driven deepfake. So the example we're talking here is a disinformation-driven deepfake because it's meant to propagate a lie somehow, right? But then there are other types of academic deepfakes, which we call productivity-driven deepfakes, which are also very problematic, because sometimes harder to decipher. And we may be discussing around these two types of deepfakes.
Is this a common thing you're coming up against, or was this a total outlier and you've not seen this before?
So I think, especially in the field of climate science, there is a long history somehow of actors having clear interests to kind of dilute the scientific consensus on the topic. So we were familiar with this literature, and so we know that this has been going on for a long time. What I think changes with AI is that it becomes so much easier, so much cheaper, so much more accessible, that this kind of phenomenon could take on a new scale, basically. And so it's really this which makes us pause and kind of reflect on, whoa, what is going on? Because you must imagine for us in our research, climate science is an important input to think about what it's going to do for companies and how they navigate this physical phenomenon. But then when it becomes difficult for us to still read climate science, right? We're not there yet, but it could very soon be the case. Then this creates all kinds of new problems. So we said, and I think we're not the only ones who have this problem. So that's what got us interested in this in the first place.
I hadn't realized, it seems odd to put Grok 3's name on it. If you're producing something which is intended to deceive, I would think that the authors would hide the presence of AI, but actually they use it as a legitimizing factor. They say, well, this must be true because it's built by an impartial machine. Now, I think that's a very naive way to look at artificial intelligence. And most people know now that artificial intelligence can be manipulated to act in any way, spit out any real results that you want it to give you.
Yeah.
Do you think this has analogs in other industries? What might be the use of academic deepfakes in other academic disciplines?
Well, actually, maybe just to jump on your comment on this naive approach to AI somehow. It's true that the authors were framing the thing to say that it's being co-written with AI, so it's legitimate. And it's true that the debate has completely shifted in no time about this. But the paper was published in 2025, and it's strange to see that in a year how strongly the debate has shifted. It also corresponds to a political turn also in the US. And for example, just to echo also this historical precedents and what we're seeing right now, actually a few months after the paper was published, the Trump administration also published a report by the Ministry of Energy to do a synthesis of climate change research when it actually completely changed the scientific consensus. And many authors in the US as well said, well, actually, it's not what we say in our research. And again, in this time, there were controversies about using AI to kind of reframe, reshape the type of conclusions that were made by academics on the topic. So yes, it's true that it's not everywhere at the moment, but we do think that on very sensitive topics, like where you have academic issues that have a lot of policy implications, such as climate change, health issues.
In the tobacco industry, for example, has also been an actor that has engaged a lot in this kind of interfering in scientific consensus, for example, historically, right?
And so historians of science have documented this process. And so there is a very famous book by Orestes and Conway called Merchants of Doubt, who just document this process from a historical perspective. And somehow what we see today is this type of process engineered with the powerful AI, Gen AI tools somehow, right?
And I think then to circle back to that it's somehow weird that the authors listed Grok 3 as an author. I think that's essentially the big difference between the two types of deepfakes as well, right? So the second type of deepfake would be a kind of logic of cheating, not of lying, where you basically use AI to kind of outsource, offload some of your cognitive tasks and don't really acknowledge the use of that. And so as a result, all kinds of weird stuff are happening in academia. So for example, in Belgium, there is this very famous case whereby actually the rector of the University of Ghent basically gives an opening speech of the academic year. And so cites plenty of people in a wrong way with citations that never existed or were completely fabricated. And just to illustrate, if the rector of the university is already caught doing that, imagine what students are doing, right? So it's kind of a way to illustrate this problem of productivity-driven deepfake, which are a logic of cheating, and basically a way to manage time constraints.
Sure. So the first I understand is the climate skeptic article, which is really designed to propagate a lie and couch it in very scientific terms in a way that is going to convince the layman, but maybe also convince some kind of experts or semi-experts. And the second one is more a case of people using AI and not checking their sources and not checking their facts. But there's a similar pollution of the information sphere, because I suppose that talk by the rector of Ghent University might be published online, and these references might then get cited in other papers and things like that. So what is the biggest threat, and which other actors are we seeing using the first type to try and manipulate what we consider to be true and false?
Actually, it's difficult to say what is the biggest threat at the moment, because we may say that, like, for example, there are obvious political dynamics involved in disinformation-driven deepfakes, but there are also massive productivity issues that may create enormous problem related to productivity-driven deepfakes. And so here, just for productivity-driven deepfakes, so those situations where you don't acknowledge the use of AI to automate the production of academic work. It may happen to university rectors, but it may also happen to students, right? When we have students doing some group work or doing some master thesis, there is always this question of, has the use of AI been acknowledged? And it may also be used by academics themselves. And so actually there are different debates today, mostly in natural sciences, about how big the issue is. And for example, the issue has been widely documented in fields of medicine, biology. And for example, there is a recent academic paper that was published a few months ago in the British Journal of Medicine by David Coser and Baptiste Skanka. And basically what they estimate the number of automated papers since 2000. And what they say is that it started from a very low number to a situation where they estimate that today up to 15% of the academic production in the field may be automated by AI, which raises, again, huge question, but can we trust it? And very interestingly, they also say that the problem concerns both predatory journals, so this type of academic journals when authors would pay to get published. So of course, there is a very big trust issue with this type of outlets. But they say it's not only about this journal, it's also about more established journal. And there was a recent outcry in the medicine community about a paper about cancer that was working with experiments with rats. And if you type on Google the rat with the enormous penis and the enormous balls, you will find huge funny publications in reaction to a fake paper that was published in a very classic journal and went through the reviewing process, although it was obvious that images had been completely manipulated by AI and that everything was kind of fake in this article. So actually, that's a big issue, and productivity-driven deepfakes may be just on the rise today, but the problem may soon become really exponential.
I wonder, in the example that you cited, it seems like it's obvious. What about the authors of the paper? Were they in on it, or did they honestly think that this was going to further their career and it was just a shortcut for them to get a published paper?
That's a good question. I would like to know how they react to that. I don't know them personally, so I cannot answer for them on this aspect. But for the people that have been working on this tendency of using automated publication and predatory journals, etc., it also comes from the academic incentive system. And for example, there were different studies that try to understand how comes this huge spread of weird academic papers, and some of them come from wrong incentives. For example, in some countries, such as China, to get a position in a hospital after graduating from medicine studies, you have to publish. And of course, it's easy to imagine that when you have to be a doctor publishing an academic paper, there may be a big conflict in time. And so here, it's also because of these incentive mechanisms that you have this type of problem. And so we need to reflect also.
And if your colleagues start doing it, then it creates for you more pressure to admit to succeed, also to higher productivity standards, right?
So what's the short-term or long-term way to fix this? Is it that our journals need much better reviewing and they need humans for a start to review things and make sure, well, this is obviously not true? Is there scope within journals to do that? They're obviously probably working on a limited budget like everything else is. I just wondered what were the best strategies for getting around this.
I think maybe should we circle back to the problem of epistemic pollution first a bit, and to how it's because we outlaid a bit these two types of academic deepfakes, but both, as you mentioned in the previous question, are leading to a kind of pollution, contamination of our knowledge environment. And as we said, this is not new. This is something that has been around. But we believe that with the spread and diffusion of Gen AI, this could take on a new scale because it's becoming so much cheaper, so much easier, so much more accessible to produce this kind of deepfakes. And so what is also super important to realize is that these deepfakes don't need to be persuasive. They don't need to convince you that one or the other is right. They just need to confuse you, right? And so I think that is a really important point to underline also in the debate, for example, on the consensus on climate change. It's very important to realize that the goal is not to convince you that climate change doesn't exist, but just to delay, maybe this, maybe that. That is already highly effective.
Kind of make it so that, tire the reader out in terms of, well, no one knows, there's so many opinions, no one can really say, let's just not have this debate anymore.
Exactly.
And do you know the Brandolini's law?
I don't. Brandolini's law, explain that to us.
It's like the asymmetry, the bullshit asymmetry principle. And the idea behind that is that it takes an order of magnitude of efforts to debunk bullshit than to produce it. So somehow you are that's structurally unequal. When you're propagating falsehood, it will take a lot of time for people to fight it. And so here, that's also what is scary with the use of AI to promote this type of false truth, Because if you take into account this Brandolini law, then you would spend your entire life to try to debunk falsehood if you just want to try to debunk it systematically. So you have to find other mechanisms to do that.
And so if we take a bit of a forward-looking perspective to this problem, then you could say that scientific research output of serious research, it could go up a bit, it could go down a bit, could remain more or less constant. But AI capabilities to produce these kind of deepfakes, whether they're accurate or not, are going to require much more effort to check and review according to the Brandolini's law principle in the coming future. And that is going to increase probably exponential, right? Because we have agentic AI arriving. So you have a researcher in a box, basically, who can write papers for you all in parallel. And so it's going to be much more of this, unfortunately. So we really believe that with this paper, it was very important to put this problem of epistemic pollution on the map and to say, okay, we have a critical window of opportunity to start thinking about how we organize responses to this problem.
And it's really time that we reflect on it because of the speed of AI capabilities, how massive it's being used today. And also we draw this parallel between what we call epistemic pollution, so the pollution that is created in the way we relate to knowledge, can be trusted or not. And we really think that there is a big analogy to make between this type of pollution and, for example, biological pollution such as microplastics. Because if we don't consider the problem and act on it, what may happen is that very soon our digital environment will be polluted by epistemic pollution all the way. And so we will have to learn to navigate in this type of pollution as well, or to try to mitigate it or to prevent it in the first place. So somehow we find back our origins of academics in environmental and sustainability topics and try to apply that to that new type of pollution.
And have you come up with any strategies or any pathways to possible routes forward? Because, as you say, it seems like within a generation, digital information flows could just be worthless because it's so hard to find the stuff that's true and it's so easy to pollute them that we can't look there for serious knowledge anymore. What are your strategies? What have you come up with?
So it's a complex debate, of course, because also it's an emergent problem at the moment. We're starting to perceive it. We're starting to perceive the signs also when we interact with students, etc. And so we try to elaborate on recommendations, but we have to be very humble. It's a very complicated problem. And we know that handling physical pollution is already quite complex, so a new type of pollution, but we try, right? And so actually in environmental pollutions, we have, this distinction between how do you prevent upstream pollution and how do you manage it downstream. Today, if you think about epistemic pollution, it's mostly downstream management. So you have a researcher that during their weekends will try to check for, okay, is this academic article, was it written by a machine or a human? And so that's really super interesting to see that we are seeing the emergence of a new type of actor that we call science depolluters, right? Exactly the same way as when you have an oil spill, you will have people that will depollute the land, the beach. Here you have science depolluters who spend their weekend trying to spot fakes and ask for retractations.
I think that's very clear. And I think at present, the incentives are very much stacked against such depollution activities, right? If you want to further your own career, you publish your own articles, you don't spend time on review, right? If you're teaching students, the easiest way is to close your eyes for any AI misusage that there may have been in the grading of their exams, for example, etc., etc., etc. But if we want to depollute our knowledge ecosystems, I think it's very important to think about these incentives and how they could be changed and how we could reward kind of this type of activities. Also in the creation, for example, of translating somehow academic knowledge beyond academia, more towards policy, more towards stakeholders, etc., trying to incentivize these kind of trusted communication channels and how to construct them, basically.
Absolutely. I think that's really essential. And that really echoes also the start of our discussion about the role of institutes, such as the Sustainability Institute, you have to have also more academic engagement on public debates to safeguard a little bit what academia says. Mm-hmm. And also what I've been realizing as a professor lately is when I discuss with my students on, okay, where do you find relevant information on climate and business? Of course, the classes that I have with them is not the only source. They are exposed to plenty of other contents. And what I observe is that it's already very difficult for them to assess the reliability of the sources or just to assess where it comes from, who was producing it, what are the sources that would be worthwhile to continue following, what should be the kind of weak signals that should raise suspicion and actually we discuss that a lot, trying to understand what is a good source, what is the trustworthy source of information on the topic. And I think it's also part of our new job of professor to learn our students and our stakeholders to navigate this kind of polluted, cognitively polluted environment.
Because there's one thing of ruining scientific journals and ruining information flows because you think I can't trust this. But it's an even worse problem if policymakers start to make policy based on manipulative lies that are trying to make them do specific things. So whose responsibility ultimately is it to manage this problem, legislate against it? I mean, it could be a legal thing with people who, it could become that people were breaking the law by presenting their research as fact or lies as fact. Is that the responsibility of academia? Is it the responsibility of the state to do that? Or is it going to become, going forward, everyone's responsibility as an internet user or as a user of digital information that we have to have these skills, these critical ways of assessing whether something's a good source or not?
I think, feel free to compliment, right? But indeed, that's very much also why we believe this notion of epistemic pollution could be helpful, because it is kind of a parallel or implicitly, it's an analogy of physical pollution. And so that allowed us to kind of leverage some of the experience that we have studying business and the natural environment topics and how somehow pollution control and prevention strategies have worked out in this context. And so very much there, you see this question of who is actually responsible coming up as well. And today, it's very interesting to see that you have a very similar kind of dynamic playing out, where actually a lot of environmental pollution problems are also very systemic. But at the same time, we see a lot of responsibilization of individual, for example, consumers or brands or companies, etc., but very much with this kind of voluntary action responsibilization of individuals. And we see actually at the same time in a lot of institutions, the adoption of AI being very enthusiastic, but there is some kind of charter for responsible AI use, etc. So somehow these big questions of incentives and who is going to do the review, etc., and so on, are being reduced to, are you as an individual responsibly using the tool, right? And so here we see a similar dynamic and also a bit the similar questions being raised. But from this literature, we know that there is also plenty of other types of pollution control strategies. Maybe you could talk about those.
Actually, just to jump on this, what we know from environmental pollutions is that very often the problem is shared. It's operating at various levels, exactly as Jozef mentioned. It's both individual consumptions, but also corporations and regulations, etc., etc. So you have to think about it in a multi-scalar way, which makes it super difficult. And of course, one big issue is who should be held responsible for that. And so here, if we just go back to the issue of epistemic integrity and use of AI to lie, I think we can easily agree that there is both an individual responsibility, like Grok 3 is not the only author of the article, right? There are other authors and other people that manipulate the AI. But then there is also the responsibility of the Gen AI tool itself. right? And it's really striking to see how difficult it is just to formulate that today, because the regulation of AI on their relationship to truth or the ability to use them to produce falsehood. I mean, clearly the tool should be somehow responsible for the way it's being used, And so actually here there is a big regulatory debate to be held. We understand that it's very complex, of course, but it's also inevitable. And so, of course, it's a multi-level dimension. You cannot completely put all the problems on the individual. You cannot also put no responsibility on the individual. So it has to be thought a little bit that way. One thing that could be done as well is reflecting about these AI properties and to see if AI can be designed to have a better relationship with truth and observed facts, and how can it be designed somehow to prevent those type of uses. So
or
that's
at least
also
transparency, right? With, for example, more open source, or even DeepSeek model has been peer-reviewed in Nature, for example. So that's an interesting dynamic that we observed as well.
But complicated, because most of the time AI doesn't appear to know when it is wrong. As the Ghent University example, that AI wasn't trying to produce a badly written speech. It was trying to do the best it can. And for some reason that we don't really understand, it got it completely wrong.
No, and the difficult thing is that most of the time it's not completely wrong. It's very plausibly right, but it turns out to be wrong, something like that. And that's the difficult dynamic somehow. And so I think somehow we use the analogy between epistemic and physical pollution to think about who is responsible and what kind of strategies could be used. Second element is that we say we should try to think about incentives for depollution, right? But the third thing is that somehow we're going to find or we're going to be stuck with more pollution, or at least that's the risk that we perceive. And so somehow we should be trying to increase our resilience against epistemic pollution. And so thinking of ways in which we can train students to have different skills in an era of AI seems to be a very important step as well. And so we think students should have much more training nowadays in how actual knowledge production goes without AI, right? Understanding the basic principles of philosophy of science and epistemology, but then at the same time also being able to contrast this with how AIs are actually producing their output, and how it's indeed, as you say, right, it's a statistical approximation of something that is very reasonably close to being true based on somehow training data sets. But that could be very wrong in a very novel or uncertain situation, right? And so I think that's really a critical third recommendation that we would have as well.
I think, yeah, absolutely. Especially because this problem, inevitably, people will try to solve this problem using AI and technology. They'll say, well, what we need is we need a type of AI that can go and assess all these papers and give us a blue tick for the ones that work. And that might be a solution, but it might just be putting AI against AI to sort of fight itself. And it may lead to just even more slop and stuff online that we have no idea what's true and what's not.
It's the eternal auto-expansion of technology, right? But I would like maybe to jump on one point that was raised by Jozef. Actually, it's about the word uncertainty. And I think that the critical aspect that is shocking for us researchers, academics, when we use AI, is that we've never been in a situation where asking AI a question, it answers, I don't know. Where actually, as a researcher, you're always in front of situations where your answer is, I don't know. That's actually what drives.
That's what you want, because then great, let's find out.
That is driving research.
It's a very big part of life.
That's a very, very big part of our life. And so we're confronted here with a tool that doesn't know how to think about uncertainty. And I think that's precisely in that space that we have a big issue. And that's the reason why we think it's super important to re-engage students about how do you produce data? How do you produce knowledge? How do you spot uncertainties? How do you know that you don't know? And actually, these are very basic and fundamental epistemological question. And we think that these very fundamental questions should go back really at the core of education today, right? Because it's really what will make the use of AI relevant or irrelevant.
Because we're also seeing the first executive coming to us saying that, okay, we had 2 interns for a couple of months in our economic research unit at a bank. And after a few months, they present their results, first presentation for somehow the department. And basically, you could see that it was AI. But then, no problem, right? It could be just to do the slides, to do the editing, etc. But then when the executives started to ask questions about the content, the students almost had the tendency to go and ask AI again. And so that clearly raises the question of, what can humans still add? What do we need to teach our students to make sure that they have an added value and aren't just dependent on the tool? And so I think that's very complementary somehow with this with this call that we're launching.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think of how you're adapting your studies and how you're preparing tomorrow's business leaders, tomorrow's entrepreneurs to lead, to manage people, to start companies in this environment is fascinating. I really look forward to the report, and I've very much enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you so much, Aurélien, Jozef, for joining us here today. It's been fantastic.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us. This was ESCP Edge. Join us next time for more fascinating business discussions with ESCP professors. Thanks a lot.